Hello, everybody. We're back with another live conversation. I'm going to just tour you around the gallery while people start to join, and Ryan Thayer Davis, who we'll be having the conversation with, comes on. So let me just turn this around so that we can check out all these awesome paintings. And there's Ryan. Hey, Ryan, I'm going to add you. Hello. Let's see. Let's see, he's just connecting. Hey, Ryan.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. It looks like I'm a little low here. Let me bring this down a little bit.
Calibrating.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you all right. Thanks for joining today and talk to me about your work. I'm excited to talk about this one. This is such a great show. I'm going to just turn the camera around real quick. I didn't even pan all the way around. So this is an exhibition of artwork by Ryan Thayer Davis called Songs with Creature. And they're all these beautiful, big, colorful, abstract canvases. An amazing amount of texture on them. So, Ryan, could you introduce yourself and introduce the exhibition and talk a little bit about what you do? Hey, everybody.
Sure, yeah. I'm been painting seriously since 2009. I went to art school at UT Austin, graduated 2006. I'm native Austinite. I have a day job as working for a family business, doing mostly architectural interior photography, which translates well to image making in general. And yeah, I pretty much just had a painting practice going for the last decade or so, and mostly in Austin, but also I like to do residencies and get out of town and have new adventures. So
you're one of the few native Austinites left.
there are definitely a lot more people than there were here than 20 years ago. That's for sure. But
yeah. Well, thank you for talking with me today. I think the first thing that we should talk about, even though these paintings are amazing, is I can't help but get past the title of the show, Songs with Creature. And I know that that was based off of a playlist that you've been putting together of music.
Yeah, I can't remember what came first. Oftentimes I'll just collect titles in sketchbooks that might be specific to a particular piece or concept or just a phrase that I like. So I can't remember if that originated from the playlist itself or if it came from somewhere else. But I definitely, the moment that phrase came up, I definitely thought it'd be a good title for something. And there is one painting called that that's not in the show, I don't think. No, it's not.
No.
But I thought it was really nice for the show itself.
I love the title, and I listened to the playlist. I found it on Spotify.
Nice.
Under your name, and it's a pretty intense playlist. I mean, the music in that playlist is heavy.
Well, yeah, it turns out that when there are, usually more times than not, when there is a creature in a song, it's going to be kind of creepy and dark.
Are all those songs, they all have creatures in them?
Yeah, that's kind of like the thematic element, or the thing used for the categorization.
I didn't even notice that. Are they in the song titles?
No, it's just somewhere in the track. You have to kind of the game is you have to find the creature. It's in there somewhere.
Okay.
So it might just be like one little moment, but yeah,
that's really
something.
Cool.
There's something in those tracks. Yeah.
Do you think that the paintings in the show maybe directly relate to that music, or you just liked the title?
Well, I thought that the title was interesting because I think that in the work there are lots of like sort of semi-animate entities that aren't exactly creatures perhaps, but some sort of aliveness or essence. They might even on the whole be considered to be alive somewhat.
Yeah.
Or there also could be like related to biology, like cellular or some sort of living tissue or something like that.
Yeah,
But I guess
this
more than anything, like it's just sort of like the creature, like a piece is sort of like a creature in a way.
the painting
And
itself, the whole painting.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they're also, I also like to think that I like thinking about musical structure a lot. So it's not uncommon for me to think about painting or my work as being like a song, for instance, musical composition. Although songs technically have voice and words, but apart from that, that also kind of fit.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned cellular in this piece behind me, actually. I'm going to just turn the camera around. Feels cellular or something. Like, I see it in a lot of different ways. Rows of teeth or rows of audience members or all these
Yeah,
cells bunched up.
yeah, and I'm not really a big fan of that analogy, but it does fit. I mean, I have to admit it, right? um, but
Well,
that's definitely not something that I'm thinking about primarily when I'm making the work.
yeah, I love these reactions in the chat. It's mind-blowing work, right? They're such intense paintings. And in addition to the title of the show, Songs with Creature, and that adding another layer of, how you can look at this work, you also supplied us with, I asked you for just a few studio notes so that I could get a better idea of like why you were painting. And you
Yeah,
being you, which I love it, you gave me 7 pages of studio notes that you've been keeping. Um,
yeah. Like I don't really like writing artist statements because they always feel contrived and like really missing the point about
Too
what I'm
short.
doing. So I thought it was a lot more interesting to write up like a readable, enjoyable, sort of mysterious selection of notes from the past 5 years in the sketchbooks that directly generated the pieces in the show. And
Yeah,
once I typed all that up, it actually read. I thought was read pretty nice. So
I
um,
did too. I mean, it's not exactly linear, but every single paragraph is really beautifully written, and it's all very insightful, and it definitely adds color to this show. Not that the show needs more color, but it's it's great. I pulled a few lines from the studio notes, and just for everybody listening and watching, I did just publish your studio notes on our website.
oh,
So if
cool.
you go to like the press tab on my website, ivystercontemporary.com, there's a little pull down menu and you can get to the blog, and you're the first and only blog post at this point. I just felt like it was, even if you can't come into the gallery and look at the work in person, which you really should, because not only are they colorful, but they're 3-dimensional, and you've got to get a sense for that in person. But I wanted people to have the opportunity to read your studio notes because I love them. So I pulled the first one that I pulled, I think relates to your work maybe the best after just talking to you, but correct me if I'm wrong. You wrote, I wanted to investigate difficult starting positions with this body of work. Um,
Hmm.
can you can you sort of elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of projects, this one or a lot of these paintings kind of started off with when I didn't have a set agenda or nothing scheduled in the future. There was no kind of specific thing I was working towards, and so I was kind of free to just sort of. My original objective was to make paintings that were really direct, simple, fast, efficient, and much more graphic and flat than I had done before. And I just got into a weird mood where I kind of started off with kind of like the worst starting positions I could imagine, just because I wanted to be. I was feeling a bit cheeky, a little bit irreverent, a little bit kind of like maybe a touch cynical. I don't know.
Hmm.
But so I would start out with like in the first painting layers, I would start out with like a huge element in the corner, or elements
Yeah.
in all 4 corners, and then like one huge element in the center, or maybe like huge crosses through the center. And if you've ever been to art school and you take like the initial composition classes, those are basically all the things you should never do when you're working. That's how you're taught, whether right or wrong.
You're
That's kind
taught
of
these rules, right?
right. And so, given that those kind of ridiculous, silly starting conditions, then over time the challenge became like, how do I actually make this painting transcend these pretty severe limitations that were imposed early on. And so
Yeah,
that's true for a lot of the pieces in the show. Not every piece, but
right. Well, is it true for this canvas here, Fjord Me Baby?
to a certain extent. That canvas actually was started kind of in the middle of the period, and it was just a sketch that had been hanging around that I thought was funny and interesting. And then once I started working on it, it was just one of those pieces that just started going. And so I don't think it applies as much to that, but because all the other painting language had been so well developed in all the other work, it couldn't help but like influence everything that got going in that one. So
Yeah.
it sort of inherited all that kind of midway through.
What's an example of a canvas that, you know, sort of you did start from that difficult starting position?
Yeah, I mean, the one that's in the frame right now is definitely one of them. The orb painting is definitely one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, those are the best two examples. I'd have to see
Yeah.
the others, but oh yeah, there's the Steve, there's always Steve in nature painting. That was also, you know,
Steve, yeah.
directly a part of that as
This
well.
this pink one here, I love this piece. And it's so loud. I mean, just like all your work, but all your work is so loud that this one kind of gets lost in this corner a little bit next to this giant pink one, which is if this piece was hanging in any other context, like it would be the brightest thing by far. Um,
Yeah, but
so
in this context, it's kind of muted.
it is. It's pretty
Yeah.
amazing. So let's see. Another line that I pulled is the work is very concerned with the inner life of shapes. And you said, I'm only interested in what the shape signifies. I found that to be, you know, sort of mystifying. What do you mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes, you know, after a certain amount of hours in the studio, just certain notes come out and you don't really know what they mean. Maybe I don't even really know. But what I think I meant by that is just that I I try to want to get away from what shapes can signify, but I want them to be very specific and functional, and you
mhm.
know, like, and I don't want them to just be arbitrary or random. I want them to be very specific and very of a sort of type of grammar or syntax or a set of nouns or objects that don't refer to anything by themselves, but too much, but are also at the same time super specific. And so what I found was that once a certain vocabulary of shapes gets going, they can start having interactions. They can start having different dynamics between them, and they have their own character. They're kind of funny. They're kind of sinister sometimes. They're
Hmm.
also silly and kind of doodah or boing boing or whatever. Um, and sometimes like all those things together. And so I think that's kind of what's fun about working with uh, only being concerned about the inner life of geometry, because what's like more banal than geometry, even though it's profound, it's just very factual and
Yeah,
you
I
know,
mean,
somehow deep as well. So
as like this painting over here in the corner, you know, feels so complicated and almost, you know, at first glance might feel like you were just making completely arbitrary decisions. But the more you look at it, the more you realize how important all these different relationships are between the different shapes, the colors. I mean, your eyes constantly moving. Um, I can't help it pan to the side on this one because this one might have the most texture in the whole show, which is saying something because every single painting does. But yeah, I definitely, after looking at your work and reading that line about you know, sort of the inner life of shapes and the relationships between the shapes, it's really beautiful to think about. Um,
cool. Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and
And that one is very arbitrary in a lot of ways, but to begin with, was sort of like a free uh, exploration, kind of like a sketch. But then, yeah,
did it start as a
eventually,
sketch?
yeah, that one did. It was just like a thumbnail.
Yeah.
But then eventually, when it comes down to like making sure that every color has a purpose and a place and is doing something very particular in the piece, then it all becomes at the same time as this, you know, the beginning of it's kind of arbitrary, it becomes very specific and very like calculated. It takes a lot of intuition to figure out what to do to make it um, like become alive or compelling or have like a
Yeah.
dynamic presence.
What part of this one started as a sketch, and what parts of it, did you sort of riff off of that sketch?
I think if you look a little closer, there's like this like little yellow line, the outline, which is actually
Like
just like a negative space, which is
that
started
line
out being
sort of follows.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the original first brush mark, the first touch on the canvas is that line, and I just like kept that in there because it's always kind of nice to make a line out of negative paint or negative space.
Hmm.
Like it's like there is no it's almost plain canvas.
Well,
So it's kind of nice to have that feeling that like cuts through the entire, especially if you have a lot of paint layers, that cuts through the entire development of the piece and just goes to square one. And almost every painting in that show, there's always a little bit of canvas in there that is that you can see from the very first day that it was begun.
it was like the,
Uh,
the the first layer of paint.
yeah, like completely raw, like just sloppy almost. So I always like to keep some of that in there because it
I, I
shows
can
it kind of shows the time of it.
I can see it in this one where we're getting all these like just giant globs of paint. It's got to be maybe an inch thick in some areas, but I do see what you mean that if you look closely, you can
Yeah,
see the first layer is
right,
really
right.
thin and very loosely painted, and um, yeah, it's really a nice buildup over time. Um, I mean, there's so many good lines from from your studio night notes. This is the last one that I pulled, but I do encourage everybody listening and watching to go to the website, ivystercontemporary.com, go to my press list, and you can pull the bar down and look at Ryan's studio notes. 7 pages of notes. Um, they're all amazing. They're all insightful. This last one says, sound frequencies can all be nested within another and to make coherent music. And you were sort of making this relationship between your paintings and how you've got all these other elements that, in any other context, they might not have anything to do with each other, but you put them together and they make these incredibly complex, beautiful paintings. Um, is that something that you think about a lot while you're painting?
Definitely quite a bit. Yeah, a lot of it is sort of like maximizing bandwidth, like how many different levels of information can you have simultaneously present and still have a coherent meaning, and also like communicate all the different ideas clearly, so that they don't interfere with each other or muddle each other or cancel each other out or compete with each other too much. And so that's kind of one of the main challenges with all of this work in the show is like, how do you do that with really loud, highly saturated, high key colors and still have the whole piece come off as a whole. But also, if you want, you can go further into it and just pick out, deeper and deeper into little levels of moments or structures or
Yeah,
relationships or movement or, a lyric here, a lyric there, a melodic line. And so that's kind of what I meant by like the way that, and light is like that as well, just physically, how there's this wonderful way in which all of these frequencies can coexist and are still, you can still make sense out of them as a perceiver.
I love to sort of take in the overall, like you were saying, and then to zoom in. I mean, this one's such a good one because it's so complex and the line work is so tight that, the overall is beautiful. You start to get in close and see all these little details, all this nested color throughout. I mean, none of these lines are overlapping, and it's just so exactly made. Um, the other thing that I'll mention that I love about your work, Ryan, is that you come up with these really complex rules for yourself. You try to pull off some like really ambitious things, and most of the times you do pull those things off. I can't help but love the moments where you went for something really ambitious, it didn't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
And it's like, sometimes that's my favorite part of the painting. I mean, this line you and I have talked about before,
Yeah.
how there's this, I mean, it comes across as like, oh, what happened there at first? You start to realize that you've masked off this area, the mask, it simply fell right there and it left that ghosted image. But there's this weird relationship that comes out of that. And, I guess we should all, I can't help but think it's a little, it sounds funny, but like a little inspirational because I'm like, man, I have to try to do more, even if I might not be able to do it. Go for it. What's the worst that can happen? And is that how you approach some of these, um, some of the things that you're trying?
I mean, that was not a happy moment. But over time, like part of the skill of being a painter is figuring out how to leave just enough mistakes in the work to either spin the painting off in a different direction or just to give like a certain type of inflection to the painting so that there's just enough imperfection present. It's kind of
Mhm.
hard to describe, but if it was too clean, then it would be too analytical and too maybe graphic.
Yeah.
And if it was too messy, then it would come off as being too arbitrary or too poorly made or like too lazy or something, which are qualities that I personally do not go for. But I totally understand. There's tons of artists that make that work for them. So
Perfection, or the idea of perfection.
to me, like a perfect painting for me that I make is that has just enough. Oh, sorry, my phone fell.
Went down.
But it has just enough error. There you go. One of those errors. But it has just enough errors to sort of balance the piece.
I mean,
And
I
what
love
being
to
done is
see.
that is which ones to leave in, which ones do you like overwrite and paint out and start over or completely destroy or whatever. So
I
that
love to see the human hand in work, in artwork. I mean,
yeah,
this piece is, there's a ton of pattern in here. It's pretty exacting pattern, but the brushstrokes themselves are not incredibly exact. And there's something beautiful about that, incredibly dynamic.
yeah,
Um,
that was during a period of time where I was more interested in like gestural work and then
yeah, this body
got
of
away from
work
that.
you've been doing over the course of 5 years, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So you've changed as a painter, I would imagine, during the course of some of these canvases.
I hope so.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, we'll see.
so one of the things that I loved uh, hearing from you is one of our first conversations that we had. I looked at this work. I said, "Wow, this must be so fun to paint. Like you
Yeah,
look like it looks like you're having a ball." And you said, "Not really,
yeah.
right?
It's really not fun at all most times.
Because of what?"
Because it's really frustrating. It's really difficult. It's also just difficult to paint in isolation or after I've had a whole day of work and I'm totally out of energy
Hmm.
and then I have to go to the studio and you can have like many days on end of just feeling like this is the typical studio complaints.
Yeah.
But also it's just really tough sometimes to come up with the decisions that can make a piece go forward and it's not, even though the end result looks really fun and I always hope that it is fun. I think that
Definitely.
I always aim to make my work extremely generous but also really deep as well so that it can be enjoyable to anybody, but also if you want to go further into it, you can get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
um,
Well, that
but yeah,
definitely works. You,
it's not really fun, not really fun to make, especially that one behind you. That was really really breaking me making that painting.
I can imagine that. I mean, it is incredibly fun, and you are giving the viewer a ton to work with. But uh, yeah, that looks like an undertaking. That looks difficult to make.
Yeah, and mostly it's just the reason why it's not enjoyable is just because when it comes down to making work like that, it's just really boring.
Hmm. Tedious.
Yeah, it's so tedious, and yeah, so that's it's such a weird thing because you're making this thing that's really compelling. You can step back and be like, I think this is really on the right track. I think it's going to be a really successful work. But at the same time, I'm just like super bored and super kind of depressed that I have to like put myself to it and actually complete it, you know.
Well, it makes me think, I mean, as much as sometimes the act of painting for you can be really difficult and tedious and um, frustrating, you, I can tell by your studio notes again, you love painting, you love the idea of painting, you love sort of the absurdity of it. Um, would you say that's true? Like, what drives you to get to the studio if it's so difficult sometimes?
It's all about just being programmed. It is really true that like painting is a practice in the sense that like if you're a pro athlete, like you just are in good condition,
Hmm.
physically and mentally to do your high level thing. And I would like to think that after enough years of being serious about this and um, getting into the rhythm of going like every day, you just build up this ability to just not even think about it, to like being able to go to the studio and perform even if you're like feeling crappy or
Hmm.
uninspired or like you have nothing to offer, you still just go.
Yeah.
And some of the best sessions are when you have those feelings and then in the studio you make a breakthrough and then you're like, holy shit, like this is what it's all about.
Glad you showed up. Glad you were there that day.
And then sometimes you go to the studio and you're like all cheery and you're like in such a great mood and you're gonna get so much work done that day, and then you go and then you end up like messing something up really badly or
Right.
making a huge mistake, and it's sort of this weird. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that like studio practice should be invariant to enjoyment or inspiration, or and it has to be worked on to get to a level where you can do that consistently, which
Yeah.
is the key. Yeah.
I think that's awesome. I think that's a good note to sort of leave it off on. I mean, I like to keep these conversations short, and
Yeah.
I think we covered a lot of ground. And again, thank you for talking with me today. I love your work. I'm excited about this work. One of your main goals being, offering a lot to the viewer. I'm going to pan around again because you definitely do that. There's so much here to look at. There's so much here to sort of get into. It's all so joyful. Um, and sounds like it came from some blood, sweat, and tears, some hard work.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to put too much on that, but you know,
Yeah,
it's part of it for sure.
yeah, it's beautiful work though.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Have a good
Cheers.
night.
You too.
Bye.